I'm worried when I hear briefings like the £39 billion affordable housing funding is going to be primarily focused outside of London.
Make C3 residential more appealing to developers.
One thing about us is that we will use all of our levers to help deliver.
What levers do you have available to you to try and accelerate the delivery of housing in the borough?
Hi, I'm David Joyce. I'm Corporate Director of Housing and Regeneration at Tower Hamlets Council.
Welcome, David, to the podcast.
What's the one thing that I need to know about you to know why you've had such a successful career across multiple London boroughs in regeneration?
Well, I would say that I've probably been in the right place at the right time. I've had some amazing opportunities to work on some incredible projects like King's Cross or Vauxhall 9 Elms when I was at Lambeth. So I think, first of all, there is that factor. But I think for me, what I would say is I have a real interest in the communities that live in these places and their aspirations and their hopes and dreams for the future of their places. And because of that, I've always really enjoyed putting my energy and focus into making sure that we are working with communities. And the example I'd give is actually on Euston and High Speed 2, where I remember we were procuring a development partner. The government were procuring a development partner for the redevelopment of Euston. And everyone wanted to be involved in it. And then I noticed that we were holding monthly meetings with the residents, and it was like tumbleweed trying to get people to go to those meetings. But I myself said, I'm the director, I am prioritising those meetings. If you don't come to those meetings, you're also not coming to the sexy procurement meetings and the meetings with developers and others. It is really important that we focus on what the community need. And from my perspective, that's where you learn what's really needed. You learn about the issues that are really impacting people's lives. And so I think for me, it is about really focusing on what communities are saying about their areas and what they need. And that's been a sort of central factor to everything that I've done.
Can you just tell us which of the other boroughs, because I think there's some similarities and differences between those different boroughs as you've gone through that you've worked up at?
Yeah, so I mean, I started out in East London at the time, my first authority was Redbridge. It has a very different. At the time, it had a very different political sort of administration to what it has today. It was very anti-growth, actually. I'll come back to that. But then I moved to Barking and Dagenham, literally neighbouring borough. I could not have a more different perspective. Brilliant leadership at both political and officer level that wanted to get stuff done. And that was a real kind of shaper for me, working for Jeremy Grint at the time at Barking and Dagenham and really seeing what a regeneration-focused authority looks like. So that was very sort of shaping for me. I will say that I think then my move to Camden was a big break for me, because I sort of moved to Camden at a time when things were really taking off. And when you think about it today with the Knowledge Quarter and the great success of King's Cross, it was very much the early days of just shaping all of that. So that was a very exciting time to join Camden. And then from Camden, I sort of moved to Lambeth as Director of Planning. And again, it was a really interesting time because I think Lambeth had a lot to do at that point. It had fallen behind places like Southwark. And again, it was a real let's get stuff done mentality around Waterloo, Vauxhall 9 Elms, Brixton, a real focus on regeneration. So it was a good time to be at Lambeth. And then I had my second spell at Camden, which was very dominated by High Speed 2, Euston, and also really seeing King's Cross build out. So it was quite interesting going back later, seeing how some of the early work was playing through. And from there, I sort of moved to Haringey. And I think Haringey, very interesting authority, but in a little bit of a different moment to say Lambeth and Camden, in that it had the Haringey development vehicle had sort of gone wrong, you could say. It wasn't progressing, and trying to find a new future for how to shape that borough, and particularly an emphasis on council housing. But also it's there that we insourced our housing services, and it's the first time I really got close to sort of, although I did actually have housing for a period in Camden as executive director, it was the first time I really got to grips with sort of having an in-source housing department and managing all of the issues and complexity around that with all the regulatory change. And then finally, obviously, I've moved on to Tower Hamlets, where I am now.
And are you taking, so it seems like your career, you kind of moved from infrastructure more towards housing, and now obviously focusing on housing at Tower Hamlets. Do you think that relates back to your kind of your overall, your why, if you like, that you want it to be about communities?
Yes, I think so. I think housing is just such an important fundamental in everyone's lives. And, you know, now that I manage things like homelessness and housing, you know, I see that when I meet overcrowded families. I see that when, you know, I'm with my housing options staff dealing with people that come in the front door and presenting as homeless. I think the impact you can make by really intervening positively on that agenda is just so huge. I mean, I still love all the infrastructure work, and we've got lots of big infrastructure projects in Tower Hamlets. And when you look at things like the Elizabeth line, you see what good planning around infrastructure can do. And I've seen that myself in places like King's Cross and Vauxhall Nine Elms. But I think for me, having, in a way, bringing all those agendas together, which is what my current job does, it's really exciting because you can see the instant impact of some of the intervention you can make around building new homes, improving existing homes, tackling and preventing homelessness, while still working on some of the, you know, the biggest, longest term infrastructure projects.
Tower Hamlets is pretty unique in that it's so diverse in terms of it's got Canary Wharf, it's got Hackney Wick, it's got different communities from different backgrounds. How do you approach kind of dealing with that polarity?
Well, the first thing to say is, I mean, it's what drew me to Tower Hamlets. It's such an exciting borough. We've just so much going on. I mean, we did the launch of Love Tower Hamlets campaign last night at the Tower of London with our executive mayor. And we had developers, investors, ambassadors, we had community groups. It was a really good event, but it brought together that diversity of Tower Hamlets. One of the great things about it is that it's also one of the most cohesive communities in the country. So our most recent resident survey showed that 92% of residents believe that Tower Hamlets is a place where people get on. And, you know, that is in the most densely populated borough in the country. So, you know, people are living close to each other, they're working, living and playing in very sort of harmonious ways, actually, as our resident survey shows. And so from my perspective, it's about utilising that energy of our communities, and really making sure that we're hearing all the voices. And that's something that we focus really hard on in Tower Hamlets, that we're considering diverse needs. And working for Tower Hamlets as a council where that's just sort of written into the DNA. We did an event at the East London Mosque, a Faith in the Environment event, included all the different faiths from across Tower Hamlets coming together to talk about how communities can make an impact in tackling climate change. And, you know, the reach of that event in terms of people going back into their communities was huge. And I don't think that you get that opportunity in many places, but you do in Tower Hamlets. So I really think it's about drawing that together, but also in terms of, you know, Hackney Wick, we've got a big part of the Olympic Park, we've got Canary Wharf. You know, the clue is in the name, you know, Tower Hamlets. We are a series of different places within Tower Hamlets, and so it's also making sure that we've got kind of quite a localised approach to what we do. So when I think about housing management, for instance, you know, we want to take an ultra-local approach. You know, we're doing kind of lots of estate-based action days where we get all of our teams down there talking to residents about what the issues are. We did one on the Boundary Estate, the oldest council estate in the country, in Shoreditch, and it was an amazing day, but it reminds you that you do need to get close to the communities, because if you live on the Boundary Estate, actually what's happening on Hackney Wick is not that relevant to you, and vice versa, but you need to get it right in both places.
Yeah, you do see that challenge, don't you? That there's some positive stuff of new generation, regeneration happening in terms of bringing money, infrastructure, all the rest of it. But then prices go up. There is tensions that come out of that. So I think it is interesting that you're taking that approach. And I guess the focus on housing is that a lot of people are still struggling to find decent housing at a decent price. How are you finding, you know, what's your housing supply like at the moment? How are you finding the kind of various challenges at the moment of delivering housing in London?
Well, I think it's an important question at a time when I think the latest stats for housing starts in the country are really quite stark in terms of how low they are. And in the context of 1.5 million homes, it feels like we're going backwards. And there's a whole series of reasons behind that around things like the building safety regulator. But what I can say in Tower Hamlets is that we have got a very healthy pipeline. And this is another thing that attracts me to Tower Hamlets, is that we are firing on all cylinders. So we're a council that's building homes, and we've got ambition to step that up substantially. We've got all the big registered providers in Tower Hamlets, Riverside, Clarion, L&Q, and they're all developing. We had a recent major scheme from Clarion at committee that was very successfully approved by our planning committee, and they're getting on and building. We've got all the big developers, Mount Anvil, Barclay, you name them, Ballymore, and again with several schemes in Tower Hamlets in every corner of the borough as well. One not far from here, the Gasholder site is an example, and it is great to be in the borough to do this podcast, by the way. But so we are lucky. And actually, but Tower Hamlets has always had this history. When you look at there's an amazing graph that was done that showed housing delivery in London for the last 20 years. And the only constant, because different boroughs interchanged with each other in terms of how many homes they delivered, the only constant was that Tower Hamlets was the top every single year, and by a magnitude of 2.
And is that in direct delivery yourselves or via?
No, that's from all sorts. So it's coming back to the point about, I think we're lucky that we've got lots of partners who are delivering. I think the market is still enabling delivery in Tower Hamlets. All the same challenges are there, by the way, but I think there's just so much potential. We've not talked yet about the Isle of Dogs. The Isle of Dogs, there are several estate regeneration schemes happening there. We've got one scheme being led by Mount Anvil, which is going to our planning committee in the next couple of months. As an example, at Tiller Road. And these are all delivering big numbers for us. And so it is from all sources, but I would obviously want to do a shout out for the fact that the council's playing its role, because we've got our own housing stock, we've got substantial amounts of land, particularly within our.
I think you're one of the largest council. You've got the highest ownership, highest owned amount of properties as a council, I think.
Yeah, well, we're one of the biggest landlords. I think Southwark and Hackney are bigger than us, and possibly Camden, but we are up there. One of the issues we've got, though, is we've got lots of leaseholders. In Haringey, when I was there, I think we had about sort of 25% leaseholders. We've got around 50% in Tower Hamlets. So although the numbers of homes looks high, the actual number of social rented homes we have has declined, and because of right to buy over many years. And so that's one of the drivers for why we want to be so ambitious about new supply. And we're also doing acquisitions. We're doing buyback of former council homes.
And so
as well.
are you delivering directly new homes yourself, or is it via Poplar Harker? Is that right?
No. So we are delivering directly by ourselves. So we're building on our own land, and we're managing contractors directly to do that direct delivery. We're also in partnerships. So we've got Countryside Homes as our partner on our biggest estate regen scheme that we're doing, the Cliché Estate in Whitechapel. Which is going to be an amazing scheme, by the way. But as coming back to Poplar Harker, are one of the big registered providers who are developing in their own right, and they've brought development partners in to work with them. So they've got a whole range of partners like Hill, for instance, who are bringing forward the TV estate regeneration, and that got planning permission last month. 1,900 new homes. Big uplift in social rent, new community facilities, a new mosque, new open spaces. It's just alongside the A12 in the Poplar area. Amazing scheme. Got almost unanimous support from our planning committee. And I do want that to be one of the messages from this podcast. We're open for business in Tower Hamlets, and actually our planning committee is really firing on all cylinders in terms of getting through substantial numbers of schemes. I say to everyone, life comes at you fast in Tower Hamlets. So we have a strategic development committee, and it only considers applications for more than 500 homes. Now, in most places that I've been, we might deal with 1 or 2 of those a year. Here, we literally have at least an item every month. This is the scale of Tower Hamlets.
So what would your message be to developers or investors looking at Tower Hamlets? What do you think they should be doing if they're coming to see you or your colleagues? What would you like them to be bringing to improve Tower Hamlets and do good business?
So it's a good question, and we very much focused on this at Love Tower Hamlets last night, and our executive mayor and chief executive spoke. I mean, first of all, is really to utilise the energy and diversity of our amazing communities and be committed to working with those communities to give something back. We actually heard from one of our residents, Brenda, last night, and she spoke about what an amazing place Tower Hamlets is to be because of the relationship between the council and residents over many years, and the way that the council has worked with residents and listened. So we want developers who'll come in and really kind of buy into that. And we've got some great examples of that already in Tower Hamlets, but we want people who'll work with that. We want developers who will really look at our priorities. I mean, I think we've got quite a bit into this podcast, and I haven't mentioned the sort of overcrowding issues that we've got. We've got 29,000 families on our waiting list. We have many families in severely overcrowded accommodation, and so particularly with housing schemes, we want schemes that are going to help alleviate that. We want the family homes, we want social rented homes, but we are absolutely willing to work with developers around how you get there.
Yeah.
I think we are flexible, we're regeneration oriented, and we want to see the improvements to place as well, and the scale and the ambition. So any developer who's willing to work with that agenda, we will work with. And you know, in Whitechapel, we've seen some more commercial-led schemes recently, and that's great, and it's really going to regenerate Whitechapel. But we have been keen to push that we want housing as part of the mix. And as the mayor often says, this is our community. We live here, we work here. It needs to deliver for people here as well. And fortunately, we've got some great partners there, like the hospital and Queen Mary University, who are happy to work with that agenda. But 2 weeks ago, the mayor, myself, chief executive, went down to Canary Wharf and met Shobi Khan, Tom Venner and their team, and visited some social housing that they're delivering there. And we went up in the lift to the 24th story of a new social rented block with the most amazing views of the Thames that you will ever see.
Nice.
And our mayor said, you know, this is going to be electrifying for families who live here. This is going to be the best social housing out there. And it is amazing. And actually, it's not what Canary Wharf are always known for, but they are absolutely contributing to this agenda that we've got in Tower Hamlets now, which is great to see.
That is good to hear, because one of the things we do hear from a lot of developers, particularly at the moment, and sort of going back to the point about 1.5 million, is there is actually in many other boroughs a struggle to get C3 residential, kind of typical residential coming forward because of the viability and because of the Building Safety Act and a kind of a whole host of market conditions, etc. And it's just, from your perspective, is there anything you think can be done to try and, you know, to move the dial forward a bit? Because, you know, most people agree housing's unaffordable in London, yet we're not building enough of it overall.
Well, can I change to the end of the question slightly? What levers do you have? Because obviously some things are outside of your control, but, you know, coming into this role, what levers do you have available to you to try and accelerate the delivery of housing in the borough? Yeah,
I mean, it's a really pertinent question right now, and I suppose just to say, I before I get onto the levers that I've got, we really do need to solve this problem around the building safety regulator and the viability challenges, and things like funding and the amount of grant per unit is got to be part of the answer. Because we do, although I've painted quite a positive picture, because I do think we have a positive picture, we are seeing lots of co-living and student and those kind of tenures, which are not necessarily our priority, or actually I don't know a London borough that would say they're their priority. So we are seeing some of those challenges on some of our schemes. In terms of levers that we can pull, I suppose the first thing to say is we are open to having all of these conversations. How can, you know, at last night's event I spoke to a number of developers about how can we get your scheme moving? What can we do to help? You know, the one thing about us is that we will use all of our levers to help deliver. So if it's things like rights to light, we'll step in and use our powers to help move those conversations along. If landowners are proven problematic and not playing ball, we will look at things like our CPO powers, working with developers. So we're doing all of those things, but also, if we have to have honest conversations about, right, the choice is this scheme is not going to get delivered, or we make those compromises, then we'll sit down and have those conversations. We've got a mayor and a chief executive and a director of planning and a team that support us, who are really willing to have those conversations. and think about what can we do to get your scheme moving. And one of the things that our planning team have done is they put a fast track service in place for developers, and we are constantly in dialogue. So if there's anything we can do to help, we will certainly look at that.
I also, we do quite a lot of work in the borough, obviously, because we're based here, and I think that one of the things that is really good that you have got is the pre-app in principle. So you can just come and do an early stage meeting without, like, you know, it's a relatively low cost, and it doesn't involve like the wider planning team. You just go and have a kind of, you know, initial chat about a site, and I think that's quite helpful, and it doesn't exist in other boroughs.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to hear, and I definitely I agree that should be in place in all boroughs, actually.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember whether we had something similar in Camden and Harringay. I think we did. But yeah, I can understand why that works, because you have to put so much investment into bringing a scheme together. Yeah. And if you don't get that initial steer, then it's difficult. But I think when you work in sort of regeneration focused and delivery focused boroughs, we understand that, and we'll definitely try and enable those conversations.
Taking your experience across these multiple different boroughs, what do you think are challenges that are unique to Tower Hamlets that, say, a Camden or a Barking Dagenham or Redbridge doesn't have?
So I think one of the things in Tower Hamlets is that we still have areas that need substantial infrastructure investment to unlock. So if I give an example, the Olympic Park has a bridge across the River Lee roughly every 200 metres. Fantastic, and obviously lots of investment went in around the time of the Olympics that's made some of that happen, and you see how vibrant it is. Someone mentioned Hackney Wick earlier. When you go to the Lowrie Valley, there isn't a crossing for 1.4 kilometres, and actually there's still quite a lot of land down there that needs infrastructure investment to unlock. So we are working with Newham, we're working with the GLA about how we can unlock that. We need to we do have quite a bit of community infrastructure level we can put into these things, but you know, it is complex to unlock infrastructure in areas like the Lower Lee Valley, and actually some of the values there are not as high as perhaps Canary Wharf or the city fringe, and so it's harder to get stuff to happen, and it's where our big numbers could come from, because actually the Lower Lee Valley has potential for 30,000 homes. It's one of the biggest opportunity areas in London, so I think that's a particular challenge. And I think sometimes people think, well, it's Tower Hamlets, there's lots of money and good values to make, but actually we've got the same challenges that they probably have in places like the Royal Docks and Barking and Dagenham. So I think that's a particular challenge. In terms of other challenges, I would say that in the city fringe we have quite a lot of offices that have reached the end of their natural life. They need a lot of investment.
And Canary Wharf.
And actually, yes, yeah, you're actually spot on. Canary Wharf as well. We've got buildings that were built for a time, and
it's not coming back.
Yeah, and they're unlettable actually. And so I think one of our challenges is, especially because we do obviously really value and support employment space, but how do we balance that with the need to be a bit creative about the future of that?
Canary Wharf is such a great opportunity. You know, it's like for us as architects looking at, you've got amazing buildings there. Okay, they're not gonna you don't need those big floor plates for offices anymore. What can you do with it? You know, can you retrofit them? Can you? That's where I think I think it's one of the questions I want to ask actually is what the council's attitude towards co-living is, because I think sometimes there are places where it is appropriate, and to retrofit some of those buildings in Canary Wharf that started their life as offices as these kind of, you know, like multi-use playgrounds, but co-living, some hotels, some residential, you know, us as architects, we would get very excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, I completely see and understand that challenge. Well, I think we're really lucky. The Canary Wharf group are very creative and very collaborative in how they're approaching that with us. So there's a great relationship between the Canary Wharf team and our plan making team about how you address some of those policy challenges and how we reflect that in the local plan. Last night, actually, Shobi Khan, the chief exec, talked about the fact that they've had 60 planning applications in the last year with my planning team, and how good a service they've had. So we are working through those challenges. It's really exciting though, because someone sort of described it, you know, we're remaking a piece of city in the same way that the West End has been completely reimagined from its original purpose to perhaps the kind of creative and cultural kind of focus it has today. we are also sort of reliving Canary Wharf now, and the challenges as well around how do you move from what was quite a car-based development to something that really works for at ground level for the majority of people who now visit as pedestrians. So it is a very exciting time to reimagine Canary Wharf. What I would say, though, in terms of your point about co-living and students is yes, but it has to be part of a mix that delivers the priorities that we've got as a borough. And so we definitely are open to those conversations. And when you've got the scale of Canary Wharf, you can have those conversations because it's definitely possible. But in some other cases, in other parts of the borough, it can be challenging when we see schemes come forward which perhaps are not given back to the community.
And is that your feeling that co-living is something that doesn't necessarily give back?
I mean, for me, the jury's still a bit out on co-living, to be perfect. I've been involved in a few schemes in other places in my career, and I've sat in rooms where people have promised me that it will not be short-term lets and it will not be basically a hotel by the back door, and then they open up and what you see is lots of rooms advertised on Airbnb. You see the people rolling up with suitcases, for weekend stays and all. So I do think, for me, I remain to be convinced that the co-living sector is genuinely delivering for the group of people that they say they're delivering for. Because I get the concept, it could be a great first step for people, for workers coming to the city. I can see why there's a market for it. But I'm yet to be convinced that actually the product that's built is delivering for that market.
Can I want to sort of say something, maybe get you to reflect upon it. But I think we going back to the 1.5 million homes, which are clearly not being delivered yet. And we talked about viability, and I know there's only so much within your gift. But I'm just wondering, is one of the dials about some flex? I don't disagree that co-living can be good and bad depending on how it's delivered and all the rest of it. But I think we mentioned Hackney Wick, where you saw informal living turning into something else actually, and creating a whole creative community there. We mentioned before we spoke. So I just think one of the things possibly planning departments or regional authorities can do is have a bit more flexibility to kind of slightly break the mold. Well, they can't change the interest rates, they can possibly show some flex.
I think so. I mean, I don't want to, offering my reflections on what I've seen so far doesn't mean I get the point you're making. And I think actually, if I go back to Haringey, the planning team there had some amazing innovations. So the warehouse living policy that they've got, particularly in the Seven Sisters area, I think really has encouraged that kind of creative balance between the work sector and living in a way that encourages a really interesting sort of artistic community to live in that part of Haringey. The upward extension policy that they have in South Tottenham, where I often cycle through that area and think, what is the fuss about? Why can't we build up a story all over London, because this does not feel harmful to me. So yes, I do think we need a bit of flexibility and a bit of wider thinking, and as I say, we will absolutely consider co-living as part of a mix, and if it's needed to unlock viability, because we don't want to see vital regeneration schemes stalled for 20 years. We absolutely don't.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. The new London plan, or there's new draft policy out to consultation about limiting co-living numbers across London, borough by borough, and I think that's potentially one way that you could limit co-living, or you could try and make C3 residential more appealing to developers, right? Because this is my reflection of, we've run this business for 10 years, and when we started it, we did a lot of housing because developers could make money off housing, like flats. And now we do lots of hotels and co-living, and we do lots of affordable housing, and we don't do a lot of private sale housing. It's just there's nobody that wants to do it because there's no incentivization to do it. So rather than prohibiting co-living or making policies that restrict co-living, my personal view, and I don't have the gift to do this, I'm just an architect, is that people should be making C3 great again, making C3 profitable again for developers. And then developers are still there. They're still doing stuff. They're just not doing C3 housing at the moment if they can make more money doing other things.
So I mean, I'd be really interested to discuss that further, how we could do that actually, like what ideas you've got. But I mean, what I would say is I still see plenty of viability appraisals. We've got an in-house viability team at Tower Hamlets, which is a great asset. And there are still plenty of schemes in Tower Hamlets that are profitable, and we are seeing schemes built out. I've come from other places where it's been more of a challenge to get to that perfect sort of point, but and also we've seen some big decisions in London, including one in Tower Hamlets, where the affordable housing percentage has been reduced substantially, and so we do need to sort of deal with the new reality. We do want to see delivery continue, but I don't know. I'm just a bit sceptical, because the trouble with having been in this industry for so long now is you see these things come in cycles, and for me, they can. People can obviously get funding for co-living and student housing. I'm not even sure, is the demand really there for the amount that's going to be consented? It's like life sciences as well. Fantastic life sciences floor space all over London. How much of it is going to really be built out, and how much of it is just about actually people can get a consent, they can bank the value? So how much of it is real, and how much of it is just the latest development bubble?
No, I agree. And I think, one of the things that, is it correct that developers on every project are made to deliver a percentage of affordable housing? Like, if you just had to step back and say, how do we get housing delivery to meet targets, you could say, okay, private developers don't have to deliver affordable housing anymore, because anyway, nobody wants those small, like if there's 6 units, an HA can't take it, and so it's just some money. So could you just say, right, developers, you have to make a financial contribution, then we'll give it to local authorities, they deliver it via housing associations? Would that be a better model? Like, those are the things that I think we should be questioning.
Well, so we're looking at something like that in Tower Hamlets, actually, because we've been doing some work with Mace on accelerating affordable housing delivery, and we're taking a report to Cabinet next week. It's got the potential to deliver an additional 3,000 homes on our own land. One of the things we're looking at is equalisation. So if we take some of the higher value sites and don't deliver affordable housing on them, but use that to cross-subsidise some of the sites that developers would never touch, actually, because they're small infill sites, they're probably not ever going to
contaminate all the other,
So we are really looking at whether we could drive that kind of approach and actually get the numbers overall, but by being a bit more flexible across the portfolio. I do think that there are examples of London boroughs all over the place that do this. I mean, even when I go back to my time at Lambeth, we did do exactly what you said with Canary Wharf Group in the Shell Centre scheme in Waterloo. At the time, what they were showing us was quite a paltry amount of affordable housing on the scheme. I mean, it overlooks the London Eye, very difficult in viability terms to deliver it there. And what we ended up negotiating with them was an off-site deal where they built the affordable housing on the Lowrie estate, and actually invested in a new nursery and some amazing placemaking down there, probably about 1.5 kilometres from the site. And actually also the other part for me was, we talked to communities, do you want to be living on the South Bank if you're if you've got sort of high needs, or your child is at nursery, or you need affordable retail? Do you want to be living right next to the South Bank, or do you want to be living in Kennington where you've got access to all the services you need? So sometimes I think we can be less purist about it, and I do think there are lots of examples of London boroughs doing that, including in Tower Hamlets.
So I think we want to wrap up by talking about the future. We've touched on it already, but if you, taking yourself out of your current role, where we've talked about the levers that you have, if you were Keir Starmer or Angela Rayner, and you've got some different levers now, what do you think? There's obviously no magic silver bullet, but what do you think they should be doing to try and encourage the delivery of these 1.5 million homes over 5 years?
Well, I had to do a shout out for London. I am worried. I get levelling up as a concept, and it's definitely needed for us to focus on what the regions need. But I'm worried when I hear briefings like the £39 billion affordable housing funding is going to be primarily focused outside of London, because I don't think that deals with the complexity of London, and I don't think it recognises London just does have a sort of role as an economic engine for the country. It just does. So I would say to government, we need, and I would have said it to the previous government as well, that also weren't focused on London, we need to have a balanced approach which recognises the importance of London and recognises the complexity of developing in London. The great thing about London is there's so many boroughs focused on we don't have the NIMBY approach you might get in other parts of the country here. We want to get stuff done. So if you invest in London, you'll see that move forward. I think we can't not mention the building safety regulator, because I can't have a single conversation with a developer where they don't mention the 18-month delays that's building in. The government have announced some really positive moves around resourcing that up and changing the sort of governance around it so that it's got more focused leadership to deliver, but it needs to happen because it's a massive blockage. And also I think we need to think about how, have we got everything right there? Have we overcooked it? Actually, having lived through Grenfell and the post-Grenfell landscape and all of the challenges around housing management and fire safety, I completely get a lot of what's happened. But actually, have we gone too far? Because it's causing a lot of schemes to just completely stall. The one example I just wanted to give is, it seems to me slightly crazy that you have these schemes now that have 6 stories, and then the next step up is 24 stories, because there's no viability in building in between. You must have got something wrong when you're in that space.
Well, I think what we were discussing yesterday with a sort of investor is that there's a funding gap, which is that previously you'd get planning consent and then you could go to your development finance and they would then pay for your design team to actually do the work to deliver the building. Now, the funding won't put their hands in their pockets until you've got the Gateway 2. So these developers, it's like £1 million to get from planning consent to a Gateway 2 application can be, some of the schemes we're working on, it's £1 million that the developer then has to find from their own...
And finance often, because they'll borrow that money to then...
But yeah, they can't borrow it anymore until Gateway 2, so you've suddenly got the shortfall, and that's why these buildings are, instead, people are going, we'll just go back to planning and reduce the height of the scheme, so losing units. So it's
I think that this is a huge challenge. I mean, Beck Seeley, I don't know if you know, but she's led some really important work about how you accelerate affordable housing delivery in London, and I'd recommend you speak to her on a future podcast if you haven't. But she spoke to a group of local authorities, London housing directors, recently about some of the messages from the investor side, because her background is with Lend-Lease, and she's now running her own consultancy. But she talked about the fact that people can get similar returns on housing development to solar farms. Which is easier to do, and regardless of what we might all think working in the industry, what do you think where are funders going to put their money? So we have to make it more attractive to institutional investors. She can speak much more eloquently to that than I can, but it was a sobering moment for me to realise that you can get a similar return on a solar farm in the countryside as to what you can, I would say, a major estate regeneration scheme in Tower Hamlets.
Yeah. John, have you got any final questions? Just edit me, aren't we saying that? Is there any last ones that you want us to ask, just to finish on something positive?
I think maybe for me, it's about, there are many challenges at the moment, and we're hitting it's been a difficult period with COVID, post-COVID, different financial crises, etc. But this is still a lot going on. I wondered what you were seeing for London in 10, 15 years' time, what your hopes for it?
Well, I hope that, it is difficult at the moment to be optimistic, and I am a natural optimist. But I think the pressure, particularly on public finances, is just making it very, very challenging. However, I think we've got some stability politically at the moment, actually nationally, London level, but also in boroughs like Tower Hamlets. We have a moment where we can get stuff done, and we can take a long-term view about the future of the places that we're working in. And if you come into Tower Hamlets, for instance, you will find that everyone within the local authority, from the executive mayor to the chief executive to the planning teams, wants to get stuff done. We don't want to put barriers in your way, but you'll also find amazing places to work within. And if for me, when I look 15 years ahead, and think about what we talked about earlier with Canary Wharf and the way that place is going to diversify and change. It's becoming a massive visitor destination now. You know, the Troubadour Theatre is about to open there with Hunger Games. It's developing an amazing visitor economy, which for Tower Hamlets is incredible in terms of jobs and opportunity. And I suppose, we last week at our staff conference, we had some residents speak to 3,000 staff at the Excel Centre. One of them is an amazing care leaver called Mohammed. And when I asked him, why do you love Tower Hamlets? He said, because the opportunity here is like nowhere else in the country. So I feel that's the thing that makes me optimistic. And I also think, these things happen in cycles. So I'm sure we'll work through what is a difficult moment in terms of delivery and get to a point where we're firing a bit more effectively.
Amazing. David, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, David.
Thanks.